And then he left Chen Zuckerberg, went to Georgetown to found this center called the Center for Security and Emerging Technology. And we're really excited to have him and actually show us what are things that are happening at CSET. Thank you, Dewey.
Thank you so much, Dashun. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation, Dashun. Thank you, Emily, also for making it possible, and everyone else who helped. I didn't see their emails, but I'm really excited to be here. And it's a real pleasure to talk to you today about something that's really near and dear to my heart. Sitting at the intersection of emerging technologies, things that are coming over the horizon. We're not sure what the applications are. Policy, where people are actually trying to make important decisions about how we spend resources, how we prioritize attentions for a nation or for a region, and then also security. These are topics that have all been very near and dear to my heart, and being able to work in all three of those at one time is really, really awesome. I pinch myself every morning that I get to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself in the center, just to orient things a little bit. I'm going to show you some of our data resources and some of the things that we've been building, some of the policy work we've been working on, and the intersection. And I'm going to kind of end with a discussion, hopefully, throughout, actually. So feel free to jump in with questions at any time. But really talking about how this co-production of research, science of science analysis, and other things like this can actually be co-produced with policy to impact a variety of different actions, both within the US and then globally. So that's kind of like the overview of what I'm hoping to talk about. I care about this topic immensely. When I was trained originally as a computational physicist. I thought I'd spend my entire life building mathematical models because it brought me an inordinate amount of joy and jubilation in my heart. And it was just cool. I didn't know anything else actually besides academic work. I really had never really explored other parts of the world. So I was pretty ignorant about how people use this type of analysis, what people would actually do with decisions. 9/11 happened. And for where I was at the University of Virginia, that was a big deal. It was a very life-changing perspective, the realizing of the security issues. Anyway, it was a big deal. I won't go into all my emotional state at the time. But at the time, I was offered a few years later opportunity to work helping people make decisions in the Department of Defense. Would have never done that before until after September 11, and it changed my perspective. But what I found after doing that for a number of years is I was obsessed with helping people make good decisions. They were going to make the decision anyway. And if you brought them good data, if you brought them good options, they made way better decisions about where they were going to allocate resources, how they were going to identify threats, how they were going to interpret opportunities. And I saw that was a real opportunity. I guess you would have called me at the time a data scientist because I used a lot of data to be able to do that analysis, but we didn't have such a cool word back then. But I really became passionate, and the rest of my career has been shaped around this need, this desire to help people make more decisions with information. They can make whatever decision they want. That's their call. But being able to help them understand opportunities with better insight and better data. So I walked here thinking academic. I went through Department of Defense. I went through worked with the intelligence community at a high risk, high payoff research manager. I can tell you more about Fuse. I didn't have a lot of slides on it, but I'm happy to talk about some of the work we did there. Did crowdsourcing, forecasting. We did a lot of different methods for trying to figure out what was happening with the future. And then worked in Homeland Security, worked at private sector and for the Chen Zuckerberg initiative, and then came to Georgetown. And the thing that was exciting about this is I got to combine all those areas together, and we had enough resources to actually be able to build a data infrastructure, which I'll talk to you a little bit about. So CSAT's goal is to provide decision makers with data-driven analysis on the security implications of emerging technologies. So we work very hard to be nonpartisan. It's really important. Actually, being data-driven is really helpful there. We can cut through partisan rancor because we bring new data to the discussion. And what previously would have been impossible to say to, for example, the last administration, the Trump administration, about immigration, we could actually say it without being partisan because we were able to show the data. If you shut off optional practical training, there will be a significant impact to the US economy. And that argument, because we were able to bring relevant data, was very well received. While if we'd gone in ideologically, they're like, oh, you want to, I don't know what they'd say, but something rude about immigration. Anyway, the point is we brought data and that helped. And so this data-driven element allows us to be nonpartisan. We're very much focused on being decision support relevant. Data-driven infrastructure, we put multiple millions of dollars into data infrastructures. And we work primarily in AI, machine learning, biotech, and cybersecurity. We could potentially work in other areas. A lot of our data acquisitions were made so that we could work in any area. But those are the areas where we had to focus somewhere, otherwise we get very tired. We also work in preparing the next generation of people who are diplomats, who are decision makers in various departments and agencies, who are trying to support decision making, or even potentially in the political sphere within Congress. So a lot of our folks go into work after spending time here, learning how to use data for the first time. They maybe been a qualitative researcher, or maybe doing other things, and have never actually seen how data could transform policy discussions. So that's one of our goals also. From a funding perspective, we're philanthropically funded. This is really relevant because we're not task driven. A lot of people will they want to give you $50,000 to do a study on something. And that's great, nothing wrong with that. But we're much more focused on doing major lines of research that allows the people who are working in this area to have enough head time and clearer thinking to be able to actually work on multiple years on a variety of products rather than just writing individual products for reports, for dollars. You can always tell an organization how they reward success. That's really important to know. So you might ask, how does CSET interpret success? So we don't actually interpret success through publications, scientific papers. We celebrate the fact that someone did it, but it's not the core goal. We found, because if you're writing for academic audiences, which is nothing wrong with that, by the way, but as a policy-focused base, if we focused on writing good papers, a lot of the policy folks don't actually read those papers. So we wanted to make sure we wrote things that were read by policymakers. So we wanted to make sure it was accessible, high quality outputs that could be easily accessible, bottom line up front kind of writing, really plain English, not getting mired in technical details, having appendices and references to get to that data for staffers and other people who need to make those decisions. We produce them, people cite them, people read them, they ask us for briefings about it, they come back with questions. These are all successes that we consider. We watch language change and how people talk about a topic. Once we've published a paper, people talk about it differently. People use our language. They might not cite it, but they use our references. Those are successes we look for. And longer term, we look for actual policy change. We look for the people who used to work at CSET, working in policy-making organizations who are actually helping make decisions about how to implement the CHIPS Act, which a lot of our people are actually working in, a variety of other things like that. So those are the reshoring and other kinds of areas. So that's kind of the successes we look at. So that's briefly, I'm going to pause.
All right, so and this is also an example that Dewey mentioned he would like questions throughout. So if you have questions, let me know. I'll hand you the mic. Here's one question. I think for this audience, everybody is relatively more familiar with the academic work and in terms of academic research center. And I think this is, a very novel perspective. So maybe you can help us just tell us more about, for example, how is this differing from like think tank, for example, versus we now got the difference between this and research center, right? But maybe tell us a little bit more on that.
So a lot of people consider CSET a think tank. We're a little different in the sense that we're data driven. So a lot of think tanks, and this is not a negative comment, I'm going to make it somewhat sounding like that, but basically most think tanks hire fancy people who have wonderful names and experiences, and they write opinion pieces about how the government should do something different. So CSET's not that kind of think tank. We're a think tank that is basically trying to find new data sources, new insights, new ways of looking at problems. And then we publish a policy written paper. We've got about 200 of them on our website, where we say, how much money is being spent in AI by the Defense Department, or other things like that. We lay out the details, we provide analysis, and we give policy recommendations. Like one of our policy recommendations on the DoD funding is you keep talking about wanting to build trust between AI and machines. but none of your funding actually goes there. So you need to increase, if you wanted this human machine teaming thing to happen, you're going to have to fund research in this because no one knows how that works and how to even measure success. So those are the kind of policy recommendations. So we're a lot like a think tank, but we're very much evidence driven. We are a lot like academics in some ways because our research is very rigorous and we publish our methodologies, but we're different in the sense of how our audience is built. Does that help? Great. Any other questions? So that's in a nutshell part of what CSET's goal is. So just one more, if I can operate this. So we have research fellows and senior fellows who understand the context in which decisions are made. So these people understand how decisions are made in commerce, how export controls are done, how Defense Department entity lists work, how innovation systems are funded through NSF and NIH and other things like that. And these people have that context. After that, we have data scientists, software engineers, survey specialists, translators who work in getting the content in a form that people can use and finding new data sources that we didn't know was available. And then we have research analysts and students who support all this work. And that's how, and then we have obviously editing processes and other things that get the papers out. We have about 60, this is 61 people right now at CSET. These are staff that have backgrounds in areas of law, political science, data science, software engineering. They have surveys, qualitative, quantitative, qualitative methods of backgrounds. They have they're linguists, economists, and a variety of other sources of people who work in this space here. We have 20 so students. We have senior people. We have junior people. There's a mentoring and coaching environment so that people develop the skills they need. We found that when we go to hire people who work here, almost no one has the skills that we need. So what we need is people who understand the context of the policymaking, people who understand technology in some way, and people who can write clearly for policymakers. So almost everyone we hire doesn't have all three of those skills. So we basically pick people with as many of those skills, and then we train up. We do a lot of on-the-job training. We do a lot of context. We do a lot of writing workshops so that people can learn to write if that's their deficiency or the thing that they need to work on. And that's how we build up this capability. Okay, that's CSET in a nutshell. Just one other thing that I think is important, and I won't belabor this, but this is really important for context of the kinds of work we're doing. So we have a number of lines of research. We have this wheel here. So the top one is national power and long-term competition with investment instruments, with incentive systems, with trade rules, with technical alliances, with controlling sensitive technology. That's in this top one here. Assessing the capabilities of machine learning systems, AI, how do they work, when do they break, when are they brittle, when are they robust, how would you design systems that work that way, what kind of policies do you put in place, where do you put funding to make sure that when you're investing in a system, you get this kind of capability, it is validated to work in the environments you need. That's assessments, applications, understanding where emerging technologies are likely to go, what kind of impact they'll have in a variety of contexts as applications, regions, making sure we understand what's happening around the world. You can't just get fixated on the US or Europe or China, or you need to make what's happening in Indonesia, what's happening in India, what's happening in the Quad or other areas or various other groups. I'm going to skip cyber and bio just for a second. Supply chains is really important. This is unfortunately, and I consider it unfortunate, our world is changing. I lived through the very exciting globalization world where everything became global. I really like that personally. But then there's been an increasing realization that supply chains can be weaponized. You can actually change, and sometimes it's unintentional. I'm not saying it's all malicious. The pandemic demonstrated toilet paper and antibiotics and a variety of other, many other supply chains are vulnerable to disruptions when things are not flowing quickly. So supply chain analysis is really important to understand what's happening there. And then workforce, this is the linchpin of pretty much everything in emerging technologies. You need really highly qualified people who can know what they're doing and work well, and they need to be in enough quantity to be able to work on the problems and populate the industries that need them, or academic, or wherever they need them. Those are the main lines of research that I've skipped cyber and bio because those are, we have three basically. We have bio, cyber, and AI. But cyber is looking at cyber operations, offensive, defense operations, misinformation systems, and stuff like that. Bio risk is looking at risky biotech research that could disrupt everything from pandemics to a variety of other intentionally engineered synthetic biological systems, and a variety of other areas, which I'll talk about. And then in the center, just looking at peer watch, basically indications and warnings of like, when is the technology going to reach a threshold that we need to be worried about it? Like the quintessential one is like AGI. When is AGI going to be a really significant, what milestones are being hit to change that? So that's an example of one thing that you could have in peer watch. You could have a variety of other things. Anyway, that's what we're working on. We also have a couple with the foreign translation work and a couple other ones, which I'll talk about. Any questions about this before we go on? I'm going to be jumping in around using these as examples, but this is your contextual baseline. Anyway, okay, so that was perfectly clear, which I'm glad to hear. Then let me hop into some of the work. So I'm going to now talk a little bit about our data work. So we have 15 full-time staff who are working as data scientists, data research analysts, or survey specialists, or translators also. We have a lot of different data providers we work with. A lot of them are licensed data because it's really hard to get free data in quantity and in regular updates. We have a number of different data providers. We have a lot of, this is all text, this is no images, just 13 terabytes of raw text, no copies. That's what we update every day in some cases, and sometimes every quarter. We use a lot of compute. This is a little old, but we've hundreds of years of compute, which is really important for training machine learning models, for implementing classification systems, for doing entity extraction, named entity recognition systems, and we derive that data. So we have four basic types. We have technical text in multiple language of scholarly literature. We have like over 200 million textual articles about scientific literature. A lot of it is in full text. We have news, we have dissertations, theses, conference proceedings, patents from around the world. So that's our technical text. We have funding information on grant funding, company data, financial transactions, mergers and acquisitions. We have data from government contracts, and then we have venture data. This is in a variety of different languages and different sources so that we can track what's happening financially, where the money's going. We can workforce, we have job postings, English, Chinese, variety of other languages from around the world. We have career history data. We have at least 450 million career history data. We've got a bit more that we're building out. We have federal employment data and a variety of other data you can request through Freedom of Information Act and other things to like piece in holes about what's happening in terms of data. We have additional services such as translation. This is ill positioned, so just let me try to move this. Oh, I guess it didn't cut it. So we have survey design, deployment. So we do a lot of surveys. For example, one study we did, there was a meme going on, which was unfortunate in DC, which was saying, oh, everyone from foreign countries are just coming and they're going to go back home and they're going to take their technology and we're going to lose. So we shouldn't let that happen. So what we did is we actually tracked down in AI 5,000 individuals. We literally tracked everyone down and learned what their career history had been. We surveyed them. We got a lot of data about what was happening, and we found out the vast majority stayed in the U.S. and wanted to stay in the U.S. And it actually matched a lot of other survey data that had been collected in. So we kind of put down a meme that like that this was a major trend. And so we worked then with survey design as well as the career history data, and we combine those together to be able to answer some really interesting. And then human annotation and model training is really important when you're developing classifiers regarding what is AI or what is a task or method that's mentioned in a technical text, or a variety of other annotations, which we'll talk about. So that's our data, types of data. So let me start with our scholarly literature corpus. So we created this merged corpus from Dimensions, Digital Science, Web of Science, OpenAlex, MAG, Microsoft Academic Graph, Chinese National Knowledge Infrastructure from TKN, Tongfeng Knowledge Network, as well as archive and other preprints, as well as paper of code. So we brought all this data together and created a set, had about 382 million articles. Then we needed to dedupe it because we found it really important to collect data from multiple sources because each one had their own coverage. So we created and we found that we could deduped it down to about 237 million articles. We update this data every day or every quarter, depending on the source. And so this data is continually growing. And we then create a citation graph. It turns out only about 108 million of those articles have references that reference each other or cite each other. So a lot of papers don't have any references in these databases. And so, we were able to get a variety of knowledge graph that we were then able to operate with in. You can see the languages coverage, and obviously English and Chinese are your big players. In STEM, this actually is pretty realistic. You know, Germans tend to publish a lot of their STEM work in English, even though there is some wonderful poetry in Russian, in German, but it's not as relevant to the STEM questions. So we haven't prioritized getting after all those the languages other than English and Chinese because we felt like that was the bulk of it. Japanese is interesting. We have about 12 million of articles in Japanese. We could do better in Japanese. I just pointing that out. And there's a few places in Korean where we probably could do a little better also. So my personal estimate is we have about over 90% of the world's literature, and the content goes all the way back to we have papers in 1600s, but most of the content is from 2010 onward. So that's an example of literature. This matters in the next thing. So then what we, for example, AI, we built a classifier for AI. It turns out AI is a very contested topic. If I was talking to you in 2010 and said, let's figure out what's happening in AI, the keyword set that we would have come back in 2010 would be radically different than the keyword set in 2022. And this is a real problem with query development and trying to do topical analysis. So what we decided is we have this wonderful resource called arXiv, which has 39 computer science related subject labels that are first provided by the author and then validated by an editor. And we were able to use these tags to help define what AI as a function of time is, which is really quite exciting. Using these taggings, we were able to train up a model. It was a Cybert model at the time. We're actually redesigning it right now for updated models, and we think we're getting much better performance. But these are examples of a few labels in arXiv, which we associated with AI. We then created training sets and holdout sets for evaluation, and we're able to create a model that was able to to classify AI articles based on their title and abstract content as a function of time. So using a holdout sample, using arXiv as ground truth, we were able to calculate our F1 here as a function of year, because we recognize that AI, once again, in 2010 is very different than 2019, and is very different than 2022. So we compare that to our own keyword search, which we spent many hours, days getting that pristine, and brought tears to my eyes how beautiful it was. But we also used Elsevier published a hybrid machine learning model / keyword model, and we compared performance and found that our model was greatly more accurate based on the definition. We also did human checks, and we did expert checks, and we found that people tended to agree that our classifier was more accurate in defining AI. So this is the kind of model we were able to then do some really interesting analysis about what's happening in AI because of this. We also used in Chinese. There's wonderful in the Chinese National Knowledge Infrastructure. They have a number of tags that they use for subject categories. The Chinese library, I forget the actual full name, but we use a number of those and also develop keyword searches to validate that. we haven't found a suitable archive type sampling system for Chinese content. So we're kind of cobbling that together as best we can. Anyway, so this is an example. We've done many other things like this, but I thought this was kind of an interesting way of, once you have a large data set, the kinds of things you can do with it. So what we then did is we took all the literature. I told you there's 237.6 million articles with 104 in part of the million in the knowledge graph. We were then using citation references. We were able to create 126,000 research clusters. These research clusters range from 2 documents to, well, actually, the original set, 200,000 range from 2 to like 10,000 papers in them. And then what we, if for the small clusters under 50, we released those and repopulated in other clusters because we didn't want, very, very two-paper clusters aren't that interesting. So we forced it. So that's why we get 126,000 research clusters that have more than 50 documents within it. And then we could use a variety of filters, which I'll show you, to be able to look at which research clusters are growing the most rapidly. Which ones have patent citations as applications reference, citing papers as prior art. Turns out 8% of US patents cite patents as, 8% of patents cite papers as prior art. It's a very weak signal, but when you're looking at 104 million or 105 million papers, you can actually get some really interesting signals to give you indications of application of technical areas or research clusters. We also look at country of origin or other kinds of signals, and we can do some really fun things with this that helps open up analytic capabilities. So here's an example of a forecasting model from Fuse, for example. We did a bunch of research to articulate what was the threshold that Yeah, I'm going to use this. I think I just lost myself. At least the ringing in my ear stopped. Anyway, so I'll use this for a moment just to keep the thing rolling. But basically, in the Fuse program, we learned that if you're asking an analyst to pay attention to a recommendation, you really need to pay attention to these areas. In 3 to 5 years, they're going to be transformative. If the box that I lay out, the list I lay out for you, is too many false positives, people are just going to say this isn't worth my time. If it's too, if there's too many things missing, they're going to say, well, this coverage isn't good enough. So precision recall are standard ways of referring to this. So we found that after doing a number of analyst interviews, that people basically say if you give people 100 things that they should look at, the threshold where they start to care is 33 of those things in that 100 actually happen, and 50% of the things that actually happen at that threshold are in that list. So precision recall kind of measures. So that became the program goal at Fuse. We never met the goal. It was too hard. There was a lot of reasons why that was so difficult. But I kept that threshold in my mind, and we've been continuing to work on this for a number of years after that program, and actually using those research clusters as definitions of topic, which is contestable. You might be able to poke holes on whether that's a good measure or not. We were able to make forecasts using historical data about what emerging technologies have extreme growth. And going to grow at roughly 10% a year, I think, or 8% to 10% a year. And we found that 87% of the extreme growth forecasts came true. That was above our threshold by a lot more than we expected. And about 48% of the extreme growth thresholds were correctly predicted. So that was just below the 50% goal that we had aimed for. Yeah.
What was the total number?
Let's see. 200,000 research clusters was what we made forecasts on. Actually, all of the research clusters, the 216,000. So once again, not perfect, and obviously backcasting. I think there's this disclaimer. Previous successes does not indicate future successes. I don't know. I'm not. There's an ad. I always hear that term. So you've got to take this with a grain of salt and be careful not to get overly excited about it. But
we finally started to cross the threshold where we felt like we were analytically useful. And for AI, we're even, it's slightly higher. It's actually easier to forecast AI than it is math, for example. It's really hard to predict what's going to be cool in math. Mathematicians are just different. Anyway, so we have these models. We purposely used a offensively simple model. We had 4 parameters, and we used scalar weighting functions and added them together. We didn't do any fancy, optimization of functions. We didn't like use, there's wonderful work to be done here, but we felt like the risk of overfitting the past is so high. We wanted to keep it ridiculously simple. That's one of the major lessons learned I had in Fuse was complex models don't predict the future, but they make you feel really good about yourself when you're publishing it. So we just really dumbed down the model. And the kinds of things we're talking about is like years since peak year. How long has it been since we had a peak in the papers? What's the 1 over the average age of the paper in the cluster? So a cluster has 1,000 papers in it, and they were published everything from like 100 years ago to 2 years ago. And the younger that, the center of mass essentially of that research cluster, that's indicative. The reference age in the forecast year, and then in the top 250 journals. We're almost on the verge of being able to cut that indicator out and add it with other ones. So anyway, we're continuing to do research here. The point is, anyway, I'm spending too much time on this because it's way too much fun to talk about, but hopefully you get the idea of the type of forecasting that we're able to do. So this concept of, we always get asked by policymakers is what should we pay attention to? And which technical areas are going to drive the future application areas of the future, or where's China going to outpace the U.S., or competition questions, or I've got an expert coming to me. Are they bringing, what kind of bias are they bringing when they're making recommendations? So these are all super hard to answer. So we've simplified it into things. Well, we can tell you what's coming at you quickest. So which research areas are growing the most quickly and are most likely to surprise you? So we have a good model for that. We can look at probabilities of outpacing. We can do a variety of other things, and we're able to use this analysis. And we created a tool that's publicly available called the Map of Science, CSIT's Map of Science, and it's basically what we do is, I'm going to show you a couple filters because I think it's fun to hear about. Fastest growing in the last 3 years, top 40% of citations. Average age is less than 15 years. That means it's a youngish topic. At least 100 papers in it. At least 1% of the authors are from commercial entities. And then here in the red one there, at least 2% of the papers have IP citations. That's the patent citing papers as prior art. That's a pretty high threshold, actually, really high threshold. And because I'm doing AI, I want at least 10% of the papers in that research cluster to be AI relevant, based on that classifier I told you about. So with that, then you can get motion correction and brain imaging using functional MRI. And this is actually a hyperlink where you can actually see what's going on in that, assuming my internet connection is spiffy enough. You can see the time series. You can see the keywords. You can see the neighbors of that research cluster. You can see the papers that are central to it, and you can actually open them. You can see the countries that are active in this space as a function of time, who the funding organizations are, who the industry organizations, Siemens, General Electric, Philips. These are all companies that develop functional MRI. So now what you've done is you've created a way to cancel your presentation. Yeah, there we are. Let's get back. Okay, so you could a way to prioritize attention, because attention is so hard to focus. And now you can say these are areas that are likely in the next 3 years or 5 years to have much more application. And other things, protein-based treatment for dementia and Alzheimer's and disease. Cerebral spine fluid markers for Parkinson's disease. These are really exciting medical areas. Then you could say, well, what are the non-medical ones? So this is highly sensitive organic vapor sensing. 4.6% of the papers cite as have patents citing them. That's a pretty unusual amount. You can see a variety of other ones here. yeah, I won't go through all these things, but they're really quite interesting. And you can dig into them and start to be able to prioritize. You can see who's funding it, where the state of play is, and you can do a lot of policy relevant analysis now when you're dealing with NSF funding program managers coming to me saying, well, where should we put our attention, or the directors of major funding organizations. And this allows you to get some context. Once again, it's not enough information to make that decision all by itself, but sometimes it's really good to know who else is funding this work, how much work is going into it, where is it in the stage of development, and those are kind of questions. And we added a military element where you can say, you know, it has co-authors from military organizations around the world. It has funded by military organizations, and now you get a very different set, you know, fiber-based artificial muscles. You get machine learning assisted quantum computing design. Once again, has a lot of national security interest. You have, oh, this is super fun, algorithms with classical optimizers. So quantum computers, there's not enough qubits yet together that allow them to actually operate functionally to be able to do certain algorithms, such as Shor's algorithm. They're not quite powerful enough. However, you can have a classical system that acts as the that basically controls a bunch of small quantum computing systems. And there's some really interesting algorithms that become possible in this hybrid environment. And you can see, you know, for example, 21% of the papers in this area are funded by military organizations. So somebody thinks it's a cool idea, maybe. And you can see the intellectual property. Anyway, you get the idea of the kind of things you can do with this? Okay, I'm going to jet on forward. I was going to do a live demo because you could call out things and actually create this yourself, but you have to do that as exercise for home. And there's a couple other data projects that are coming up that I just want to briefly mention. We're using Chinese text is very important to be able to process. It's really quite exciting to be able to analyze this text because there's so much innovation going on in China. And being able to see what's going on is a really important part. So we're continuing to improve that corpus. We're updating the AI ML classifier. Another thing we're doing is biosafety lab, BSL-3s for pathogen reference detection. So infectious BSL-3s are your infectious aerosol transmissions that might be cause serious or lethal infections. Coronavirus is one of them. So if you're going to operate in coronaviruses, you have to do it in a BSL-3 lab. So we want to know, no one knows where all the BSL-3 labs are, which is kind of weird. So we're mapping all the ones that publish research papers, and then we're adding in some diagnostic work where diagnostic operations are done for around the world. We've published a paper that is able to show where these are. We're also doing the same thing with pathogens. You know, pathogens, whether they be pandemic causing or otherwise, and we're extracting this information. We're being able to see, basically map where this risky research is going on. Once again, not a problem. No one knows where it's going on, so we're actually able to map it. We're doing a high precision gain and loss of function classifier. So we're using a 2014 definition of gain of function, and we're able to now classify where all this research is happening with a high precision. We're not so much worried about recall because we want to get that right for precision right, and then we'll eventually ramp up recall. And then we're doing a wonderful project. The Chinese job market is an exciting place, and we pulled the job market postings from most of what's happening in China over a period, and we're analyzing how the job market's developing within China. These are really fun data projects that we're working on. So I'm going to pause. Any questions about the data work before I get into the policy work?
I have a question about just the dashboard you guys built. It's just insanely impressive, right? So we spent a lot of time play with it. The question I had, and I don't think I get it, is that's a tremendous amount of work. But then you mentioned, you know, this nonpartisan think tank is to produce policy reports, inform policy decision making. But it sounds to me, you know, there's a lot of work has to be done to develop that dashboard. So what's the rationale like behind this? Sort of what's the broader picture where this is leading to? Can you tell us more on that?
Sure. We decided, we were realizing as we were doing the analysis that we could see things because we had access to data that no one else could see. And we thought that that's nice. We feel very special. We could make a living out of like slowly leaking out information that people could use. But we're like, that doesn't seem right. We're here to help people make better do better decisions in this space. So we decided to make a variety of tools that were publicly available. We're experimenting. We're not even sure we've done the right job yet. In other words, we're not sure that the tools we've built are the right ones, but we figured we would start experimenting. We got a gift actually to start exploring this. So we thought we would try to benefit society, because I was working with Nigerian individuals who have a really great product idea. Wouldn't it be nice for them to actually be able to run their idea and say, where's the research? Where's the productization? We have another tool that looks at companies, and we can start seeing what's happening in companies. What are the startups in this area? All these things are really important for our society to make this knowledge flow easier, which is why we decided to build tools rather than just write analysis. And there's an experiment. It's dangerous in a sense, because our data providers are both elated and freaked out that we're showing how to use their data in new ways. They're worried about us cannibalizing their business. They're worried about us. Nations are worried about us exposing national secrets. So we get hate letter all the time from various organizations. And you know what? I mean, anyway, I won't give you the full spiel, but we're experimenting to try to make this work. Does that answer your question? It is a lot of work, and we have and that map of science represents millions of dollars of time to see that. So it's non-trivial, but we're always looking for feedback on how to make it better. Any other questions about the data infrastructure before I hop on the policy train? Okay, here we go. So we're almost out of time here. Well, no, the lying clock, I actually have more time than that clock lies to me about. But anyway, so if you read the news, you'll recognize there's a lot of important decisions being made that are motivated by competition, alliances, challenges. This is the world we live in today. Human talent, market share, research-driven knowledge production, papers or other things, financial investments, tech transfer, unwanted tech transfer, international standards or norm setting. These are, and there's a lot of actors that are part of this that are changing the landscape of how we're in a peer-wise competition. So these are the questions that are often motivating the policies that are being implemented today. So in that mind, I just wanted to highlight a few of these little circles and talk about what's going on. So for example, the US AI workforce has about 14 million workers in it. It's not just technical. A lot of people think of the PhD person as being the only part of the AI workforce, and that's not accurate. You have software developers, you have people who are doing product development, and these people often are the linchpin that actually makes this thing actually happen. And then you have commercial teams, which are driving the funding and other kinds of things that are the revenue streams that make these things possible. So what we've done is we've taken all the U.S. job market, all the variety of different job classifications. We've looked at job postings. We've looked at all this work. And we've been able to say, this is what the team looks like. And then we can start to analyze what's happening in each of these teams. So the first really important point is it's not just PhD technical people. The second point is it's geographically distributed. So we've taken the top 5 cities based on total absolute counts. We can do this by relative. We can get different numbers. If you do, like Boulder, Colorado shows up if you use a relative number because it's a small workforce, but a lot of people are AI focused and stuff like that. And you can do you could do this for tech team 1 and 2. You could do it for different. This is all 4 of those tech teams to give you a sense of how big they are. It's a really exciting way of cutting at the data. Talent shortages are often a common reference when it comes to talent, and we find that that's true for tech team 1. There actually is a shortage, whether it fits the classical definition of an economic shortage or not, I'm not going to argue about, but it's hard to find people in that space. You have to pay a lot more for them, which is why wages are going up in that particular sector. However, we're not seeing shortages as much in some of the other areas. We see, Diversity can definitely be improved. We have a lot of information on what the general makeup of the Tech 1 and 2 teams are. You can see some of the lots of room for improvement. And we're also noting that there's a lot of work that can be done with community colleges to shore up the need for more of the other parts of the team and even software developers. And so we've been exploring the opportunity to improve the educational infrastructure and the talent pipelines. Certifications have been a thing that have been talked about, and we're also noticing that the big certifying organizations for AI actually don't use their own certifications. And it's a buyer beware still. I'm not saying it won't change, but in AI, certifications have not been as productive as we thought they would be when we first looked into it. So that's the workforce. Then you start looking at that top tier, and you look at what's happening. And with China's doing quite impressive work in terms of developing a pipeline. Their top tier academic production is quite good. We're still trying to figure out how good their second tier is. But then we're comparing the overall numbers, and you can see the number of PhD graduating projected over the next few years is outpacing worldwide production, particularly the US, by quite a large margin. And it's projected to keep expanding based on the current enrollment of in these organizations, in the educational institutions. And this is really important. This is part of that competition theme that shows up. Research knowledge production. This is, I'm sorry, this is overly focused on China, but this is once again the policy questions that we get asked. Is, you know, you've seen these kind of data before. We're looking at the top 95th percentile of productions, and China, if you call that quality, which is a decent approximation, they're surpassing the U.S. And dwarfing other countries. And you can see the collaboration that drives this is non-trivial in the green line there. There's other tools. There's country activity tracker, which I don't have time to demo, but that's another tool that allows you to look at outbound and inbound investments in AI-related areas, and you can see the companies where the money is flowing. You can see patenting, where patents are being filed, how many, and from which originating country. Lots of potential explorations. You can start breaking it down by different technical areas within AI or different industries, and you can see those. So yeah, I'm going to skip this, unfortunately. This is really interesting because this uses the map of science, which I spent so much time on. So it looks like AI safety, which is a really important question about like robustness of AI systems to make sure they actually operate in a variety of conditions interpretably so we can actually use them, and reward learning so that we don't over optimize in weird ways for the machine learning to systems to function in the way that technically checks the box but is not what we really wanted it to be. We find that it's less than 1% of the AI research is in these areas. As of 2021, late 21, we published it in February 2022, which is a little alarming. There's a lot of potential applications to this type of research. You can see country leadership in these lines of research. You can look at research clusters to start digging in what's happening. And these are the kinds of opportunities that this analysis enables. And I forgot to put the graph in there that shows that over time, but it goes up. There's a lot more work going on now than there was a little while ago, but it's still relatively small in comparison to the overall AI research community. Misinformation and disinformation is a big deal. Text generation, image generation, and we've done a number of work where we were able to show that text generated by GPT-3 is actually very good at changing people's minds if they don't know a computer generated it. So this is a little alarming because you can actually generate text that could actually influence people's thinking about a particular topic, and where it could really boost trolling and online chaos in general. And so we did that kind of work, and we're looking at comparatively in a variety of different areas there. The last thing I wanted to close up with is we have a number of values. that are really important to the future of innovation and the future of how technology influences soft and hard power among geopolitical environments. And the three, we need to be able to enable public and private innovation, that ecosystem to run well. Being able to slow that down is not really a great idea. You want it to be able to run effectively. You want it to help solve pressing problems in our society today. That's why I got into technology, is because I thought it would be a very useful set of tools to help the world and humankind. So innovation is really important. At times, you want to slow unwanted tech transfer to people who are using that technology unwisely or unproductively. Criminal organizations using ransomware. We would like to slow that tech transfer because that's not an effective, that's not a good use of the technology. And being able to protect this key enabling technology. So that's the slow down concept. And then safety, ensuring that AI systems are safe and they operate within our best values. This is a really important, so the EU is focusing on regulatory actions in this place. The US is focused on incentives, everything from tax credits to a variety of other tools to be able to incentivize safe development. The AI safety research I just showed you is another example of that. These are important questions. And so with these goals in mind, what levers do we actually want to use to help encourage this? And this is the next concept. So with these objectives, there's a variety of different levers that we have available to us. We have hubs and infrastructure investment in where innovation districts, how, there's funding, there's internet capability, there's talent, all of that is centralized. You have funding and investment information is really important because, innovation and research, you need funding to be able to get going. You need tax credits, subsidies, these kind of things are tools that governments can implement to be able to optimize and improve the goals that I was talking about. Education, talent training pipelines, risk mitigation such as liability or insurance or portfolio management of R&D investments, or consumer safety are elements that are part of risk mitigation. Regulation and incentives are, actually that consumer safety was part of the regulations. Auditing, investment details, other types of incentives. Controls, export controls are in the news quite a lot right now, but there's entity lists, there's sanctions, there's foreign inbound and outbound investments. There's a variety of different features that the countries can use as levers. And then there's alliances, treaties, trading partners, other things like that. So the question now is, using this kind of data, how do we inform the choice of which levers to use and how to use them to be able to achieve the goals that we're going for? And that's really what CSET's trying to do. And I would encourage you, as you're thinking about this, what are the types of research questions that you could answer to help inform the improvement of society through the right choices of these power levers. And the last thing I'll just leave on is, part of that, CSET has this foundational research grants program where we partner with academics who are trying to solve really hard problems that have major policy implications. And sometimes these things don't get much funding because it's not recognized as a priority yet. So this is a way to co-produce our future policy by doing research. And this is something that CSET is actually funding, and there's a number of areas that we've explored. Everything from methods for treaty verification, because how are countries supposed to agree not to develop world-ending AI, or not even world-ending, but just like problematic AI, unless they know how to verify the treaty. The countries will never agree to that. Scalable AI assurance. This is a lot of our reliability questions and a lot of gaining high confidence over systems that are high-stakes systems, and being able to work at increasing scales, anti-proliferation techniques, AI standards and testing, and a variety of others. These are the kinds of things we're looking at. So this is kind of a call for partnership and for thinking about how to solve these types of problems. Hopefully this has been useful and at least mildly entertaining. And I look forward to other questions in the vast amount of time that we have left. Questions?
I hate a quiet room. Thank you very much for that presentation. Really incredible work that you're doing. I kept thinking, you know, information is and knowledge and data is power, and this is very, very powerful. And you're making it transparent in a way. So where you choose to put your focus and the tools that you choose to make public can really influence the power of various players. So I would think there's a lot of people that are going to want to get in your way. So, you know, if this was Hollywood, you'd be the star of the movie, right? So what do you do to protect yourself and your organization from these, you know, bad players?
So it's always an important question to ask. We, in some ways, we're using only publicly available information. We're not like finding any like, you know, secret data stashed in the, you know, paper bag under a parking garage or anything like that. So in one instance, we're being open. We are very concerned about being balanced in our assessments, because you're right. If we get on a high horse about an agenda, we can actually influence the discussions. And we work very hard to try to think clearly and manage our conflicts of interest. We don't take money from governments. We've been offered it. We haven't taken it because we feel like it's important for us to be philanthropically funded, and that kind of model allows us to manage the expectations about the papers, so that we can speak truth to power in a way that we don't worry about lunch tomorrow if we speak truth to power and it's not well received. So that's one way we do it. We engage with everybody. We talk, we hear their ideas, we work with, you know, a variety of different, we listen to a variety of different perspectives. We work very hard to be fair and open in that perspective. So that's another way. And then we're continually, our entire culture at CSET is, you know, kind of a rigorous reassessment of what we're doing. Are we doing the right work? Are we actually asking the right questions? Are we, and we kind of update our thinking regularly. Each one of our lines of research has a regular review cycle where we decide whether it's really helpful or not. So those are the kind of things we've done. I don't think it fully answers your question, but it's how we've tackled it.
National Network for Critical Technology that both of us are part of, that we're starting. And then you mentioned you're not taking money from the government. So you're doing that for free for our network? Well, interesting. I see. Okay, got it. Okay, should have given the portion that should be allocated to you to Northwestern. Oh yeah. Okay, good. All right, that's good. But then, like, when you're thinking about philanthropies, I mean, are you disclosing all the philanthropies, the funding that you guys get, and aren't they partisan in some ways?
So, I mean, when I first entered science policy, I was told that anything that matters to society is going to become political. And I needed to just, if I didn't like that, I needed to not work in anything that mattered. And I wanted to work in things that mattered. So I mourned for a few minutes and realized that I was going to have to deal with politics. So yes, politics are all around. Everyone has their agenda. Everyone has a perspective. The way we take money creates a firewall between our funder and what we do, so that they don't have editorial power over our work. That's how we've set it up. Fortunately, our funders have been very comfortable with that, and that's how we've been able to do it. So yes, every funder has their own things that they would like to see the world change to be. We work with them, and we try to still be independent in our analysis. So it's how we try to manage it, and through managing our conflicts of interest in a way. We try to be very disclosive about how we what those conflicts are.
Neil Ormos asks that the list of languages for the publications excluded Russian and Korean, and he's wondering if that was just too small a fraction to be displayed.
Yep, they're too small. We actually have Russian-specific databases. It's just they don't do much in AI, for example, at least that they publish. And Koreans are wonderful work, but the Korean language representation is actually fairly small on our side.